I am Anna Seawoldt, and this is Authentic Parenting, a podcast about personal development in the context of parenting, where I explore how you can find more calm, connection, and joy in parenting through the process of self-discovery and inner growth with a trauma-informed lens. Today on the podcast, we are talking about attachment. What is attachment? The importance of attachment, the science behind attachment, the background of attachment theory, and attachment styles. Learning about the science of attachment can help us better understand ourselves and the people in our life and the relationships that we have with those people. In fact, developing a secure attachment bond with our child has been argued by experts as one of the most important things we can do as a parent. Attachment is the notion that interactions with primary caregivers in early childhood create internal working models in our brains that later impact how we view ourselves, view others, and view relationships in adulthood. My guest today is Dr. Jenny Rosier. She's an associate professor of communication studies at James Madison University, the director of the Relationships, Love, Happiness Project, and an all-around love enthusiast who has dedicated her life to figuring out how individuals can use communication to live happy, healthy lives connected to other people. As an expert in romantic and parent-child relationships, Dr. Rosier has taught several courses and written dozens of articles about attachment throughout the lifespan. She lives in Virginia with her husband and 4 young children. I truly enjoyed this conversation with Dr. Jenny Rosier, and if you are curious, we have a link to a quiz that you can take to find out about your attachment style. Find it in the show notes. And now, please enjoy this conversation with Dr. Jenny Rosier. Jenny, welcome to Authentic Parenting.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, I'm excited to talk about attachment, one of my very, very favorite subjects, I think, in the entire world of psychology and human nature, human development. How come you became interested in this topic?
Well, I have to say that I went to Purdue University for my PhD. And when I was there, I took a attachment theory class in the child development department and child development and family studies department. And I just was so incredibly blown away by the theory itself and how applicable it is to every part of your life at every stage, cradle to the grave, as John Bowlby would say. And so I decided right then that I was going to really work on studying attachment in the communication field for, the rest of my academic career. And I've really, really enjoyed studying it since then.
Does it have a personal importance to you as well? Let's say, did you have, an early loss? Did you lose a parent or divorce, that kind of stuff?
Yes, I did. My father passed away when I was 24. So when I had took that class, it was after he had passed away. I think that everyone has had something that's seriously impacted their attachment, but the whole idea of childhood trauma impacting attachment in a negative way or maybe not being impacted in a negative way if you have that secure base caregiver in your life. I don't know. I think that, of course, I can relate attachment to my own life. My my father died when I was 24, but he became ill when I was 12. And so he had a chronic disease for 12 years, the last 12 years of his life. And so it was definitely traumatic in my life. But my mother was such an amazing primary caregiver and secure base for me that I feel like I got through it pretty well. And that has always been fascinating to me, that it's not always about the trauma that the child experiences. Instead, it's about, does that child have a secure base adult to help them get through that trauma?
Yes, it took me years to understand that as well. Having gone through my life experiences, I always wondered, how come I ended up like this and my friend ended up like that? And as a child, I always wondered that. But then now, of course, I know the answer.
Exactly.
And not to sidetrack this conversation, but I just finished reading an amazing book, and I'm hoping to get the author on the podcast. It's called Motherless Daughters, The Legacy of Loss. It's a phenomenal book, and she talks about attachment as well, especially when we lose our mothers when we are young, as children and teenagers, and how that can impact our own life, our relationships, our sense of self, the attachment throughout our life, and the partners we choose, and the patterns that we exhibit and bring into relationships. And it validated my experience of losing my mother at 13 so much that I thought I knew and I dealt with my own pain. But this book was such an eye-opener in terms of attachment and my pattern of attachment with other people, and maybe I can talk about my pattern later, but let's talk about you. So your father was ill for 12 years.
Yeah.
I feel like when parents are ill and it's a prolonged period, as opposed to a sudden death, children are sort of going through that grieving process already. Did you feel like you were going through that? How was it for you?
Oh, definitely. I was like I said, I was 12 when he became sick, and we were told a handful of times in those 12 years that this was his last day and to say goodbye. And we literally said goodbye to him probably 3 times. And then he would wake up and he would be okay for another few months. And it was a very bizarre thing to happen, but we would go up and down, thinking that now was the time. And he only had a few months, and then it would turn into a few years. And so, yes, my sister and I definitely, and my mother, went through the grieving process over and over and over again. And I hate to say this, but when he died, when I was 24, I was ready, if that makes sense.
Yes.
I was prepared for it. I had prepared myself for 12 years for it. And so I wasn't relieved in any way. It was still very terrible, but I was ready for it, if that makes sense.
It does. I mean, 12 is such a formative age. You're neither a child nor a teenager nor an adult. Going through that experience for such a long time, you became an adult.
Definitely.
In that process. And I would love to know, how you processed it. What kind of developmental processes or milestones have you gone through? I mean, 12 years in your life, you shifted from being from barely a kid to a teenager, then to an adult. Those 3 phases, right? Talk to me about that in terms of your life and in terms of attachment.
Yes.
And how does it relate to your story? How did it form? I'll ask this question later. Yeah, let's tackle this first.
So interestingly, I just had a birthday. I just turned 37. And last year when I turned 36, it was an interesting year for me because it had been, so last November, it had been 12 years since he passed away. And so it was a moment in my life where I could say he was well for 12 years. He was sick for 12 years. And now it's been 12 years since he passed. So it was a perfect third of my life had gone by without him. And I could very easily see my life split into these three phases. Like you said, when I was 12, I'm the oldest of two. And when I was 12, it was in my head, my time to grow up and to become as helpful as I could be. It definitely made me grow up faster. His sickness also made me grateful. And I guess it made me be more optimistic. And that seems backwards, but for me, I had a strong, secure base with my father and with my mother. And so even though my father was very sick, he was still providing attachment security for me. And my mother was as well. And so I became grateful for the things that I had. And I became extremely grateful. And it made me much more optimistic about things. And for instance, now as an adult, if I get sick, clearly I don't have a terminal disease, but if I get sick or if someone I know gets sick, or my child fell out of a tree last summer and had a severe concussion and a huge laceration on his face. And while it was terrible and it was hard to get through, I knew that things could be worse. Things could be way worse because I experienced way worse as a child. And so for me, has made me, I guess now, be more optimistic about things, that things will get better, that I got through something really, really hard in my life and I'm okay. And so I can get through anything that the world throws at me. And somehow it gave me strength. And the way it gave me strength, though, and the way it did not give some of my peers who went through similar things strength, is because I had secure attachment figures in my life. I had my mother, I had my father until he passed. I had my grandmother, my mother's mother. I had some family friends, my friends' parents, who helped me find attachment security. And so this is why, and this is what has always been so fascinating to me about attachment, this is why you can see one child go through something traumatic and they are essentially changed in a very negative way because of it. And then you can see another child go through a similar experience and they seem to be okay. I teach an attachment communication class at James Madison University. And when I talk to my sea of 19 and 20-year-olds, I say, how many of you come from a divorced family, which is a traumatic life experience? And many of them raise their hands. And I say, how many of you feel that your parents' divorce impacted you in a seriously negative way? Maybe it's made you not believe in love anymore, or it's made you think that marriage is a farce, right? Or it's made you not trust relationships that you are currently in. And only about half of them raise their hand. And they look at the other people who are not raising their hand with confusion. And I say, well, those of you that didn't raise your hand, how do you feel your parents' divorce impacted you? And they'll say, oh, I don't know. I think it was fine. And they don't seem fazed by it. And so for me, that is just unbelievably fascinating because all of us have grown up hearing that divorce ruins children, homelessness ruins children, the death of a parent ruins children. It's not the experience that necessarily negatively impacts people. It's that they do or they don't have a secure person to help them get through that negative experience. And that is that's promising, that's hopeful, that's optimistic, right?
Yes, yes. And also the foundation that you had prior to the
Oh,
experience.
yeah.
Right?
Exactly. I had 12 years of unbelievably secure attachment. People ask me all the time, what was your childhood like? And I say it was amazing. It was incredible. I had such a wonderfully innocent, wholesome childhood. And unfortunately, halfway through that, my father became ill, but I don't remember anything unwholesome about my childhood before that. And even after that, it was still quite wholesome. We had this thing that we were dealing with, this elephant in the room that we were trying to deal with. But my parents were very open with me, talking to me about what was going on. I was never left out of the loop, if that makes sense. I was always told that they were there for me when I needed them, and I believed it.
That's the main thing.
Yeah, even as a rowdy teenager, I still believed my parents were there for me.
But that's the main thing.
Yeah.
You know, people can tell you things, but did you have the experience? Did you internalize that?
Exactly.
And you said yes. You know, people can say I love you or I'm there for you, but you may not feel that, right?
Yeah.
It's a feeling first and foremost.
It
so
is.
Then talk to me. Let's define attachment. What is attachment, and how does it get form?
Okay. So attachment is it's used to explain the bond typically between mother and child, but I would say that is an old way to look at attachment. I would argue that attachment is a way to define the bond between child and a primary caregiver, whether that is a father, a grandmother, a nanny. Any adult in a child's life can be a attachment figure, right? And so as it is, like I said earlier, it's a cradle to the grave theory. So attachment begins at the start of life, and children can build attachment security based on the sensitivity and consistency of a parent's responses to them in infancy and early childhood. A child who is responded to when they cry, a baby who's responded to when they cry develops an internal working model in their brain that tells them that, hey, when I need something, there's a caring adult that is there for me, that will help me. It helps them build trust. It helps them trust other people. It helps them view themselves as a positive person. And this, like I said, starts at birth. Infants who are left to cry incessantly and not be responded to, whether they are being left to cry at night or they're being ignored during the day, they start to develop internal working models that maybe say that adults are not trustworthy, that maybe the world's not so great of a place to be in, and maybe worse, that they are not worthy of consistent sensitivity, which can seriously damage self-esteem and opinions that one has about themselves. So the consistent sensitivity is the way that new parents or parents of young children can start to build attachment with their child. As we go to middle childhood, I would say anywhere from 5 to 11, the attachment needs shift from physical proximity and consistent sensitivity to that idea of emotional availability. And so a child who's in school, you clearly can't be physically close to them all the time, but they need to know that if they need you, you will be there. So saying things like, if you need me, you tell your teacher to call me. tell the go to the principal's office or go to the nurse and tell them to call me, and I will be there if you ever need me. Telling them that you miss them throughout the day, telling them that you thought about them throughout the day, helps them know that they are part of your world and important to you. And that starts to build attachment security with them at that age. Asking about what their hobbies are, talking to them about things that are maybe not significant to you, but are significant to them, showing that you care about their little world, all helps to build attachment security. And that desire for emotional availability, although teenagers have a hard time expressing that, they still need that. So when we go into adolescence, they want to know that you understand them, that you are there for them when they might need you, or that you're willing to give them space when they need space. Like I said, like you said, it's the feeling of knowing that your parent is always there for you. If you ever really needed them, that they would drop everything and be there for you, and they would back you up. They would be on your team, right? They're not going to hurt you physically or emotionally. And those are things that help build attachment security in adolescence. When you get into adulthood, you start to use your romantic figure as an attachment figure. Once you get into a serious romantic relationship, you start to use your attachment figure or your romantic partner as an attachment figure. And so people who are married, their main attachment figure is their husband or wife or their life partner. And so attachment impacts us throughout life, and it impacts the way we view ourselves positively or negatively. It impacts the way we view other people positively or negatively. It impacts the way we view relationships. Are they worthwhile? Are they valuable? Or are they too scary? Should they be avoided at all costs? And it impacts how we see the world. The world's a good place to be in, or it's a scary, anxiety-ridden, not great place to be in.
Yes. The three elements in the beginning that forms attachment, right? Responsiveness, sensitivity, consistency. Let's talk about this a little bit. I think that this is huge. And if you will, I would love for you to talk about the 3 or 4, let's say, attachment styles that develops early on.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so attachment in infancy is fully based on the interactions that infants have with their adult caregivers. And so what this means is any adult who is spending a significant amount of time with your infant has the potential to become an attachment figure, which means that you need to be very picky as a parent about who spends a significant amount of time with your infant. So if you have a nanny for your infant, if your child is going to childcare, if grandma is taking care of your infant during the day when you're working, or if you and or your partner are the sole providers, caregivers for your infant, you need to make sure that whatever adults are interacting with your child for any significant amount of time, that they are willing to put in the attachment work for your child. So a lot of times parents will ask me, well, I have to work. So am I ruining my child by putting them in daycare? My answer to that is no, in no way, shape, or form. Could you be interrupting or damaging their attachment by sending them to any run-of-the-mill daycare? Maybe. It's not the act of sending them to daycare that can potentially impact attachment in a negative way. It's the idea that maybe you're not being as careful with who is caring for your child. So you need to find attachment figures who are willing to do that consistent, sensitive responsiveness. There are plenty of daycare centers where people are willing to put in that work. And so it's not necessarily about that the separation from the mother and father is definitely stressful on the child, on a baby, but it is okay if they are also going to an attachment figure. And that could take time, right? Like you're not going to drop your child off at daycare on the first day and, oh, they're magically attached to their nanny. No, it's not going to happen right away. But hopefully the adult that you're leaving your infant with is motivated and dedicated to building that attachment relationship with your child.
And meeting the needs of that child.
Exactly.
Meeting the needs.
Consistently sensitive. Yeah. I mean, I could talk about daycare ideas for a long time. I have lots of ideas about that. But yeah, so this idea of consistently, sensitively responding to a child in their infancy and early childhood is really, really important. Some attachment researchers would argue that around 18 months of age, the patterns of behavior that are created with a attachment figure create this attachment foundation or attachment style. Other researchers would argue that that goes up to 3 years of age. So I'm a little in the middle. I think having 4 children myself, around 18 months, I don't totally believe that the attachment style is set. I think it's closer to 3 years, but it varies among the researchers. So children then have this attachment style foundation, and they carry this attachment style with them throughout life. It impacts how they start and maintain and even end friendships, family relationships, and romantic relationships when they're older. It impacts how they communicate. It impacts how they positively or negatively view the intentions of other people, how they view themselves, again, positively or negatively, and how they react to everyday stress or severe trauma. So this can go back to what we were talking about earlier. I likely had a very strongly secure attachment foundation. And so when I was experiencing that trauma, I reacted to it differently than someone who maybe didn't have a really strong attachment foundation. Go ahead.
The research suggests that, that's what I read at least, that 55% of the population, general population, is securely attached. Do you agree with that?
I actually think it's a little bit more, but I'm also on the side of researchers that argue that we don't nicely fit into one of the 4 categories.
Yes,
I believe that all of us have a attachment style foundation, like a primary one, but then we have tendencies in other areas. For instance, I consider myself a very securely attached person, but I am also secure enough to say that I have dismissive tendencies. And I definitely do. I have dismissive tendencies all the time. I do not have anxiety. So I don't have anxious preoccupied tendencies or fearful avoidant tendencies, but I definitely have some avoidance. You know, I can feel touched out by my children, especially where I feel like I can't have anyone touching me. Come on, give me a break, give me some space. I definitely have some of those tendencies. And I think that is actually much more common, especially when I'm teaching this class at James Madison. My students all take a survey to figure out what their primary attachment style is. And there is no one that nicely fits semester after semester after semester. There is no one that nicely fits into one category.
Yeah.
Everyone has a primary one and then tendencies in other categories. And I would even say that those tendencies can change based on the relationship, right? So
absolutely, yes.
While I do not have any anxiety in my opinion in my romantic relationship, in my marriage with my husband, I don't have anxious feelings there. Sometimes I do have anxiety with friendships, right? Sometimes I wonder, oh, does this friend want to be my friend as much as I want to be their friend? Oh no. Sometimes I do feel a little, clingy in friendships, especially adult friendships that are hard to maintain after you are married with children.
That's a whole nother podcast topic.
Yeah, right. That is a difficult
Yes.
to have. When I tell my 19-year-olds, the friends you have now will not likely be the friends you have later. And they're like, no, really? So wait till you have children. It'll drop like flies.
Yeah, it's yes. I completely agree about the predominant attachment style. Like I always thought I had secure attachment style, and then my secondary tendency is more anxious, ambivalent, and then I remember like I sort of vacillate between the two.
Oh yeah.
And I had a friendship. And of course, I lost my mother when I was 13. So that was like I felt neglected and anxious and clingy and needy at some point. Two relationships. And I also had a difficulty getting close to people because at some point, when it became too close to intimate, I would end the relationship because that's the pattern I knew because I didn't want to be hurt because my mom had died suddenly and I didn't want to suffer in any relationship, including friendships or romantic partners. I would end before it ended itself. So I know my own patterns. Why was I saying that? Why was I saying this? About the friendship. Sorry. At some point in my adult life, my friend moved away. And it was such a traumatic thing for me. She moved and she didn't get in touch with me for several months, maybe even a year. And I felt so hurt and neglected and abandoned. And all of that surfaced. And I'm like, wow, like I am in my early 40s.
Yeah.
Why am I responding to this friendship? Why did it mean so much? And so, you never know how this attachment can impact you.
And I think that the old view of attachment was that by 18 months you had this attachment style and it was more set in stone. I don't know that Bowlby would have ever argued it was set in stone, but I think that lots of people misinterpreted attachment, I would say in the end of the last century, to mean that it was set in stone, which gave attachment a lot of bad press because people are like, nothing's set in stone. You can't say that. But that is not what attachment is. Attachment is malleable. We know this because there are children who grow up with an insecure attachment style foundation and they can gain security. You can get banked security later in life when you interact with more secure base attachment figures.
Absolutely.
And it can go the other way too. You can have a really secure attachment foundation. It does not mean that you are resilient to everything. You can experience a negative life experience and become extremely anxious, become extremely avoidant. And so it is malleable and it is fully based on the interactions that you have with those really important people in your life. And hopefully through early childhood, middle childhood, and adolescence, your attachment figures are adults. Unfortunately, sometimes, especially in middle childhood and adolescence, children will turn to their friends as attachment figures. And sometimes that can go well, but a lot of times it doesn't because it's too difficult to use for a child to use another child as an attachment figure. When you're an adult, we use our peers all the time as attachment figures. If I'm going through something that is distressing to me, you better believe it that I call one of my best friends on the phone and get emotional support from them. And I am, in that respect, I am using them as an attachment figure. Now, is my husband my number one attachment figure? Yes. Is my mother still my number two attachment figure? Yes. But
why is your mom number two?
Well, I would argue that whenever you get married, that your partner should, in a very healthy relationship, your partner should there should be a shift where you move away from your parent being your number one attachment figure, and your partner should become that attachment figure for you. I understand that lots of people do not use their romantic partner as their attachment figure, but there's a long line of research that would argue that that is a frequent transition that adults go through when they become in a serious, life commitment, marriage or life commitment relationship, that they start to move away from using their parent as a primary or the main attachment figure and use their romantic partner as in that place. I still use my mother as my attachment figure, don't get me wrong. And she laid an amazing foundation, and she still makes me feel the attachment security that I need when I need it. But my husband is my main attachment figure. For sure.
Yeah, I just want to recommend a book very quickly here and mention Dr. Gordon Neufeld and his work in regards with attachment. And the book, Hold On to Your Kids, is an excellent resource about what you just said. When teenagers don't have adult attachment figures, they turn to their peers, and that's not always as healthy because who is leading who? Yeah. So it's a great resource.
And one could argue, and researchers have argued that this is one of the main reasons that gangs work. Because a lot of children do not have attachment figures, and then there's this older child, an older teenager who's promising, I'll always be there for you. I'll take care of you. I'll protect you. And this child who does not have a secure base adult in their life wants that. Everybody wants it. And so it's very appealing to then join a gang or join a pimp, right? Who is going to protect you and take care of you and do things that other adults in your life have not done for you.
Because we have needs. We basically simply have emotional needs. And when those needs are not met by our primary caregivers, we turn to other people wherever we can get it, wherever it's available, even if it's a misguided, misplaced source. And that can be, those are my clients I work with every day. Because we're wired to have those hierarchical relationships, right? We're wired for connection and all of that. I really want you to first tell people, like I know who John Bowlby is, and a lot of listeners probably, but I want you to tell, you mentioned him a few times, who he is. And I also want you to go over the description of each attachment style so people can sort of self-diagnose themselves. And also, if you know of a test or a quiz that they can take online.
Yeah, I do.
My community, I personally love those quizzes too. And I can, if it's free, I can link it in the show notes.
It is free.
Post it in my community so people can take it and learn a little more about themselves.
Okay, so John Bowlby was a British psychiatrist, and he, back in the 1940s, late 1940s, he started noticing that children who were separated from their mothers. So this started off with the whole children and mother, because think about it, it's the 1940s, and mothers were typically primary caregivers and fathers were quite distant in the caregiving role. So during the bombings of London, a lot of children were sent away to the countryside for safety. And this was a very common practice. They were loading children onto buses and shipping them out to the countryside away from the bombings. And the parents were staying behind to protect their homes and do whatever it was that they needed to do. And the children were sent away, and they would go live with family members in the countryside, or they would go to these towns and where people were willing to take in children, and people would come to the town hall and say, I can care for 2 children. I can care for 3 children. I can care for 1. And they would just stay at their homes. Now, these children were well fed. They were well cared for. There was very, very little signs of abuse or neglect. It was not a common problem that was happening. But these children were negatively impacted by this separation. And John Bowlby just was like, okay, their needs are being met. They were clothed, they were bathed, they were fed, they had a shelter, they had loving adults taking care of them. Why were they so, and by negatively affected, some children were committing suicide, were severely depressed, were cutting, like injuring themselves or cutting themselves off from their family when they returned, right? So he just didn't understand what was going on. So he started studying these children, and he started recognizing that it wasn't about that children needed more than just these needs, these primary needs that they thought, like feeding and clothing and bathing. They needed more than that. They needed their mother. They needed their attachment figure. And back then he was really focusing on the mother, again, because it was the 1940s, 1950s, and that's who we talked about being a primary caregiver. And so then he started realizing that, okay, this separation of mother and child is really bad. It's very bad to separate children from their mothers, and it's causing really bad mental problems for these children. And these children had these problems the rest of their lives. He followed them, and they really were not doing too well as adults. So then he started looking at hospitals. And back then, if your child was sick and they went to the hospital and they had to stay overnight, you did not stay with them as their parent. So you would go and your child would be in a large room, likely in a gated bed, so a crib if they were 5 and under. Even 5-year-olds would be put in cribs, and a gated bed if they were a little older than that, but they'd be in a room with lots of other children, and 1 or 2 nurses would be in charge of all of these children. So clearly they couldn't get the adult interaction that they needed. They were likely scared and by themselves and lonely, and they were stuck in these cribs and beds. And if you wanted to visit your child who was in the hospital, and this is whether your child was in the hospital for 2 nights or 2 years, you could come during visiting hours. And that was it. And then you had to leave. And again, he started studying these children, and they were experiencing extremely negative outcomes from this separation. And John Bowlby is credited to changing a lot of the rules about hospitals now. I mean, if your child is ill and you're able to stay in a bed right next to them or sleep in the bed with them, you can thank John Bowlby for starting that. He crusaded for decades after making hospitals change their rules that parents could stay in the room with them 24 hours a day. I mean, yeah, I have a son that had surgery in February, and I was able to carry him into the operating room and hold him until he was put under anesthesia. And that, again, is thanks to John Bowlby. That would not have been ever allowed prior. And so he started all of this, and several of his students followed in his footsteps and continued the attachment work. But he is the father of attachment theory. And so when you're a child, we tend to categorize attachment into 3 categories. Some researchers might do 4, but it's typically 3. It would be secure, and then there would be 2 insecure categories. So either ambivalent or avoidant. And sometimes people will divide avoidant into 2 categories. But typically it's, anxious, avoidant. When you are an adult, there are, again, sometimes we'll have 3, but I believe that there are 4 distinct attachment styles as an adult. And they are secure, and then there are 3 insecure attachment styles. So secure, and then dismissive, fearful, avoidant, and anxious, preoccupied. Now, if you think about adult attachment, for example, so if your listeners want to try to diagnose themselves, the way we think about adult attachment is as if it is on 2 continuums that cross each other. So one continuum is the amount of avoidance that you feel when you are in relationships. So on one end of the continuum is extremely high avoidance. On the other end is extremely low avoidance. And then we cross that with amount of anxiety. So anxiety and avoidance, and again, that's really high and really low, and you fall somewhere on the continuum. So anxiety and avoidance combine in different ways to create a person's adult attachment style. And like I said, there are 4. So if you are secure, then you tend to have really low anxiety and low avoidance. If you're comfortable with intimacy, but you're also comfortable with independence. A secure person doesn't tend to worry that much about their partners accepting them. They don't tend to worry about abandonment. They don't tend to get terribly jealous of their partner. They have positive, and here's the kicker, they have positive images of themselves. I am a good person. I am worthy of love. I am cool. I am awesome. I am good. I'm a good person. And they have positive images of others. So when I meet people, personally, I believe that they are good intentioned until they prove me wrong. So I believe that I am a good intentioned person. I believe that I am awesome. I believe that I am worthy of love, but I also believe that other people are. And until you prove me wrong, I really believe that you are good intentioned. I don't think you're out to get me. I don't think you're trying to trick me. I don't think that you're lying to me, right? I have these positive images of other people.
Yeah, that's that internalized sense of secure base.
Yes.
The world is a safe place. People are inherently good.
Yeah.
When your mom or your caregiver attended to your needs when you were young, you internalized all that and you trust yourself, trust others, and trust the world, and you can go and explore, and you have that internalized sense.
Yeah. And we also, secure people also tend to be really open at expressing their emotions when they're in relationships. They're fully capable of telling a partner, I'm angry when this happens, I'm sad when this happens, I'm happy, I love you. They're just very open to expressing their emotions. So the next one is anxious, preoccupied. So an anxious, preoccupied adult has high anxiety and low avoidance. This person wants intimacy in a relationship, but when they're trying to achieve that, a lot of times they become way too dependent on other people. The movies would call this person a stage 5 clinger. This is the person who digs their claws in. They move their relationship into the express lane. They really, really want to become intimate with someone, but they tend to move too quickly. They don't move at like an average speed of self-disclosure. They want to get close to you really fast, as quickly as possible, so that you can't figure out what's wrong with them fast enough, and then you're hooked, right? They want to dig their claws in. And this is someone who's extremely anxious, preoccupied, right? A lot of people have anxious, preoccupied tendencies, or they're anxious, preoccupied, but they're not like unbelievable stage 5 clinger from Wedding Crashers. I mean, that girl she was on it. Sometimes anxious, preoccupied person can become obsessive when they're in a relationship. And this is really comes out of the idea that they have a low opinion of themselves and a high opinion of others. So I'm not that great. Other people are great. So I better figure out a way to get one of those great people to like me quickly before they figure out I'm not that great. And so there's a lot of self-deprecating talk that happens internally. An anxious, preoccupied person sometimes will not believe a compliment. So if someone compliments them or says, oh, you're so beautiful, or you're so great with, your kids, well, they don't totally believe that is true. They're like, oh, yeah, you're just saying that because you're a good person.
Yeah, my neighbor said that yesterday to me when I gave her a compliment, and it was well-deserved compliment. She's like, oh, you can be such a good salesperson.
Yeah.
I'm like, no.
Yeah, no, I really mean it.
I really mean it. I didn't argue with her.
Yeah.
Yes.
The secure person believes compliments. The secure person says, oh, yeah, I'm a good mom. I am a good mom. You're right. I believe it. It's not a cocky thing. It's just a thank you for saying that. I believe, I believe that I'm worthy of that compliment. A anxious, preoccupied person tends to have a strong desire for approval from their mates. So they might ask their mate a lot, like, do you love me? Did you like it when I wrote you that text? Are you happy? And they might ask for reassurance a lot.
And yes, and those two words describe it very well. Anxious, preoccupied, right?
Yes, exactly.
It's yes.
Yeah.
And they're people pleasers, aren't they? Also,
yes,
they always want to earn that validation and that admiration.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And they tend to be extremely comfortable with their emotions and desire high levels of emotional disclosure. Yet every time they disclose, they're worried that they're being judged. And so they're very torn. So they want to disclose because disclosure allows you to become close to someone, and they desire intimacy very badly. But every time they say something, they wonder if it was the right thing to say, if it was the best thing to say, if their partner accepted that, if they judged them. So they feel judged a lot by other people. Another insecure attachment style is the dismissive avoidant attachment style. This kind of person tends to have low anxiety but high avoidance. So
these are the type of who drive me crazy.
Yes, exactly.
If I am in a friendship or in a relationship, these are the type, because I am more open and emotional, and they avoid. Oh my gosh, it drives me really crazy.
So a dismissive person craves independence. A lot of times they claim they don't need a relationship. So you might have a friend who says, oh, I don't need a man. Or a friend who says, oh yeah, I'm going to be a bachelor for life, right? These people claim, they'll say things out loud that they don't need, or I don't need friends. I have one friend. I don't need friends, or I don't need anybody. I've got me, myself, and I, right? Mm-hmm. They tend to seek less intimacy when they're actually in a relationship. They don't openly express their feelings. So it's kind of like pulling teeth if you're in a relationship with a dismissive person. They might be described as putting up a wall between you and them. So this person has put up a brick wall and you can't get through. And a lot of this is because they have a positive image of themselves and a negative image of others. I'm really great. I'm really awesome. Other people suck, so I'm not going to let anybody get close to me because there'll never be anyone who's good enough for me. No one will ever meet my standards. No one's ever going to fulfill me the way that I'm capable of fulfilling myself. And so I don't need other people in my life. A dismissive avoidant person might be described as a loner. And this is not the person who's a loner in the sense that, like in high school, they're a nerd and nobody wants to be friends with them. That's not the same thing. This is the person who wants to be alone. They tend to appear very confident. They tend to appear like they have high self-esteem because they do. They think they're amazing. And so they intentionally avoid people. This is not the crowd avoids them and they're a loner. This is they've kind of chosen to be a loner. The last attachment style is fearful avoidant. And this is the attachment style that I am seeing more and more of my students relate to. And I'm not sure what that is saying about the next generation, but this is, in my opinion, a very difficult attachment style to get out of. If you have this attachment style as your primary, it's very hard to self-improve because I feel like the person with a fearful avoidant is confused a lot. So these people on the anxiety and avoidance scale, they have high anxiety and high avoidance. So the dismissive person has low anxiety and high avoidance. It makes sense. They avoid people because they're not nervous. They're not anxious about having a relationship. They're not worried about anything. So they just avoid people. The anxious, preoccupied person, they are highly worried, high anxiety, and so they don't avoid anyone. They want to get close to people because they want it very badly. The fearful avoidant, high anxiety and high avoidance can feel like a lot of dissonance inside of their head. So they want close relationships, but they don't trust anyone. They are torn between a desire for intimacy, but an extreme fear of sharing emotions. You know, the anxious, preoccupied person desires intimacy too, but guess what? They're not afraid to tell you anything. In fact, they tend to overshare, right? They'll tell you every single little emotion that they're feeling. They'll tell you their life story, right? They're not scared. This person is going back and forth. They want intimacy, but they're terrified to share anything. And guess what? You can't create intimacy without self-disclosure and emotion sharing. You can't get closer to someone without it. So they have negative images of themselves and negative images of others. I'm not worthy of love. I'm not that great. I'm not a good partner. I'm not a good friend. But guess what? No one else is either. The world is a terrible place to be in because everything is not awesome and everyone is not great. And I'm not great and everyone else is not great. And in fact, people might be out to get me. People might have really bad intentions interacting with me. And so there's kind of this weird confusion in their head. They tend to be hypersensitive to social approval, but avoid social situations. So they want people to like them. They want people to approve of them, but they aren't willing to put themselves in those situations where that social approval could even happen because it's too terrifying. Because they don't think that they're very great. They think that they're really bad. So why would anybody approve of me anyway? So I really would like it if someone said, I love you, but I can't even get in that situation. They tend to emotionally retreat or fail to express their feelings when they're in a relationship. And this can be frustrating because a lot of times their relationship partner might see and feel like they want that, like their fearful avoidant person wants to be close to them, but then they're not doing anything to get closer. And so it's very confusing for someone who's with them. And again, a lot of this comes back to the idea that they have a very negative image of themselves and a very negative image of other people. So I'm not that great and other people aren't that great. So none of this is worth it, right? Like nothing is worthwhile. But I really would like to be close to someone, but no one will ever get close to me because I'm not that great and everyone else is terrible. And yeah.
Is that all you can say about the descriptions?
Mm-hmm. Those are some basic descriptions.
I know. I think we will do another episode with perhaps another person in regards with adult attachments and marriage and romantic partnerships. Let's say, if you are an anxious avoidant type and you are with a secure person, how that will play out.
Yeah.
Or if two alike attachment styles are together.
The most compatibility is secure and secure. The second most compatibility is secure with anyone else. Because the secure person is usually motivated to do the attachment work with the insecure partner. So it is really and any other combination is not a healthy, it's got too many cards stacked against them. So two avoidant people could actually, if we're going to rank, could be the third best because they would be able to both give each other space, but they're never going to be close. So they're just going to be like roommates.
I was just going to say they're just going to be roommates and pursue their own lives.
Exactly.
Yes.
Two anxious people, it's a recipe for disaster. And two avoidant and an anxious is also a recipe for disaster. No one will ever be happy.
Yes.
There's just too much push and pull.
I think that's the most high conflict
Oh, man.
that I see in my work with people, when one is more anxious, attached, and the other one is avoidant.
Sure. It's so hard. It just is not going to really work. I don't know. I can't even imagine how you could make it work. It's very, very difficult. And so a lot of my students, when they find out that they have a anxious, preoccupied attachment style, or fearful avoidant, or dismissive, they then, turn to me, Dr. Rozier, am I doomed? And I say, no, you're not. One, you have a lot of knowledge already, more than the average person, just from taking this class. And you have the ability to work on yourself and to start to try to change some of your internal working models so that you can view yourself positively and view other people positively. And then two, if you find, your goal should be to find a secure partner, and that can help you have a very happy relationship. And you can earn security when you get in a relationship with a secure partner.
Or better yet, let's raise secure children, all of us together, so no one should suffer, right?
Yes, it is true.
And Jenny, now that you shared all this wonderful information with us, if anybody wants to get in touch with you, where do they find you online? And I know you have a course. Why don't you tell us just a little bit about that, and we'll say goodbye.
All right. So I have a website. It is relationshipslovehappiness.com, where we write articles. I have a couple of ebooks that are more about romantic relationships that you can check out. You can also find us on Instagram at Relationships Love Happiness, or on Facebook at Relationships Love Happiness. I am the director of the Relationships Love Happiness Project. And like I said, me and a couple of my students each semester will host an event here in Harrisonburg, Virginia, where we try to reach the public and educate them either about attachment, about romantic relationships, about something about parenting, and we try to change the event year to year. We also write articles, and we have a significant number of advice memes on Instagram. So if you like having those great advice memes in your Instagram feed, it's a good page to follow. In September, I am hosting a online Science of Attachment e-course that you can take. You can find out more information about that e-course, including where to sign up, by going to relationshipslovehappiness.com and clicking the e-course button at the very top. Or if you're on your phone, it'll be in a drop-down menu. And then you can learn all about the science of attachment in this 5-week online course. You can participate as much or as little as you want. You can watch online lectures live as they're being delivered, or you can replay them later. The e-course also involves a number of instant download e-guides that'll go along with the lectures, and you'll have live Q&A sessions with me, where you can ask me all the questions that you want. But that's where you can find me online, and I hope to see some of you online in the e-course.
Thank you so much, Jenny. It's been such a joy.
Thank you.
And that's it for this episode of the Authentic Parenting Podcast. I hope you enjoyed this interview as much as I did. Be sure to take the quiz to find out what your attachment style is. I have a link in the show notes, and join the conversation in our private Facebook group. You can follow Authentic Parenting on Instagram. My username is authentic.parenting.podcast, and I post almost daily on there. I'm pretty active. In fact, that's the only social media platform that I use consistently. For show notes, contact information, and everything else, as always, visit authenticparenting.com. Do you have a comment, question, feedback? Be sure to get in touch. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the show, rate and review it on Apple Podcasts. And as always, connect to the present moment, to yourself and your children. Until next week, I am Anna Seawold. Thank you so much for listening.